So, welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. I'm Harriet Frew, eating disorder therapist, here to support you in overcoming disordered eating and finding peace with food. Today, I have Dr. Charlotte Markey on the podcast, who is a returning guest. So, welcome, Dr. Charlotte. Dr. Charlotte is a world leading expert in body image research, having studied body image and eating disorder behaviors for nearly, or eating behaviors, sorry, for nearly 3 decades. She is passionate about understanding how to help people have a healthy relationship with their body and food. And Charlotte is a psychology professor at Rutgers University and a research scientist who has published over 100 scholarly articles and chapters about health issues. Dr. Markey is also an experienced book author, having published the Body Image Book series, the Body Image Book for Girls, the Body Image Book for Boys, and Adultish, the Body Image Book for Life in 2024. She also co-edited the 3-volume Encyclopedia of Mental Health in 2023. Hope I've got that all right, Dr. Charlotte. She writes regularly for news outlets such as Psychology Today and is often interviewed for TV, news articles, and podcasts. Today, Dr. Charlotte is back to talk about her new and improved body image book for girls, Love Yourself and Grow Up Fearless. So this episode will give you a deep dive into body image with tips and inspiration to feel better in your own body and to support your young people too. So welcome back, Dr. Charlotte, to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I was so looking forward to chatting again.
Yeah, well, great to have you here. So, Dr. Charlotte, what has inspired the latest, improved, updated version of your book?
Yeah, so the Body Image Book for Girls originally came out in 2020, which means it was all written before the pandemic. So there were a number of shifts, I think, across the pandemic that were relevant in terms of updating some of the content. And one of the things had to do with just the number of young people experiencing mental health concerns in general. That really seemed to emerge during those years and offering more support for not just body dissatisfaction or eating disorders, but kind of mental health in general in the new edition because these things are all related. And then also social media keeps evolving, right? And it really, maybe it was a coincidence in part that some of that seemed to be happening during the early pandemic years. But I really wanted to address social media more and how it can impact body image and ways to maybe prevent it from having a negative impact. So I think all 10 chapters got updated, but those are two big updates.
Yeah, and it's sure and so interesting because I think I have noticed myself, as I think everyone else has, the world has sped up so much, hasn't it, since the pandemic? And things have changed massively, haven't they, in the last few years? So you're saying as well, I mean, I think this is definitely reflected in the UK, but more and more people are struggling with body image issues, particularly young people.
Absolutely. And, it's unclear a little bit if there are more people struggling or there are more people now willing to discuss these issues because that's become more normative, which of course is a good thing. We want people to speak up if they need help. But I think it's just raised awareness that we need more information and sources of support for young people when it comes to, like I said, not just body dissatisfaction and eating disorders, but mental health in general.
Yeah, and I think you're so right. It's all linked, isn't it? I mean, I think as well, yeah, if you are suffering with your mental health, it's almost guaranteed that you're probably struggling with body image, isn't it?
Absolutely, because how we feel about ourselves is essentially our body image, right? So if you're depressed and you have very low affect, then chances are you're not feeling great about yourself. So we need to kind of address these things in a holistic manner in order for improvements in mental health to be sustainable.
Sure. So could you tell us a bit about sort of what is body image? Because it's a term that's banded around a lot, isn't it? But I think sometimes we don't really always understand what it is.
Yeah, so body image is not really just how we think and feel about our bodies. That is a component of it, right? It is a component that is more physical, more visible. But I think it's also really how comfortable are we in our own skin, right? Like, how do you feel about yourself? It is not just a superficial issue because it really kind of goes to the core of who we are as individuals and how we feel about ourselves in terms of like our identity.
Sure. And I guess, in Western culture, our self-worth is often so linked to our body image, isn't it? And I sometimes think about like a pie chart of, how much of your self-worth is sort of like attributed to different areas. And I think in Western culture, it's very easy, isn't it? I think for our worth to become so linked to our body. And obviously, it runs a lot deeper in terms of how we really feel about ourselves. But I think if we think the solution is fixing our body and we're spending 80% of our day and our focus
Yeah.
on that, I think that's quite a common issue, isn't it, really? It always feels like, well, if I fix my body, everything would be okay.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you bring up the idea of a pie chart because early research on self-concept, and this dates back to the 1990s, looked at, especially among young people, like what factors in their lives contribute the most to how they feel about themselves. So almost literally like the pie chart you mentioned. And for young people, their sense of their physical appearance was the biggest contributor. Now, it wasn't the only contributor, but it was really essential. And even more so than like popularity or how you were doing in school. So we know that that's important. We also know, though, that there's a reason why so many of us focus on sort of the physical or the fixable things or what feel to be fixable things, rather, because there's a huge industry, right? Marketing all these products and plans and potions, pills, to us. So there's always something that is appearing on our social media feed or, in a commercial about like, if you just do this one thing, if you just buy this one product, then everything in life will be better. Right? Like not only will your blemishes go away, but you'll be happier. And so the marketing is it's good. It's compelling. It's hard for even those of us, I think, who work in the field to always be immune to some of those messages. So I think that, it's no wonder, especially young people who aren't fully developed cognitively, aren't as good at parsing those messages in terms of kind of what could be real and what's probably just a false advertisement um, can get sort of hung up on like, well, okay, if I just do these certain things or buy these certain products, that's going to solve all my problems.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes so much sense, doesn't it? And I think it's so subliminal, isn't it? Almost like these messages are there all the time. And I guess I'd like to definitely come on to talk a bit more about social media, but it sounds like marketing in general is an issue. But I guess sometimes what I'm wondering is like, how do we really shift all of this as a society? Because I was sort of thinking like, your books for girls, like a little kind of little girl growing up. Like, I know obviously you write for boys, etc. as well, but for this instance, we're talking more about females, but a girl kind of growing up, and I guess we know kind of parental influence. We know, I guess social media, the media in general, teachers, peers, all the kind of influences. It just feels kind of huge, doesn't it? To kind of like, where do you start really to sort of pull out the roots of the problem? But what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, absolutely, and I love the way you just phrased that because I often will say, like, once these issues sort of dig in, right? Like the visual of like the roots kind of immersing themselves somewhere in our psyche, it's very hard to pull them back out. And so, that's part of what interested me in writing books for tweens and teens is to try to kind of offer another perspective before kids were just down this path of feeling really dissatisfied or bad about themselves or engaging in disordered behaviors. But to address your question better, I think, there are things parents, of course, can do, or parental figures, people who play, that role in kids' lives when they're young. And that's why I always hope that parents will read these books with their kids so that they can get on the same page, sort of literally and figuratively, in terms of, things to say or not say at home, and to sort of just think a little bit more about how we're socializing the next generation, right? To maybe not center their appearance in terms of their self-worth, and to think more critically about the messaging we're all vulnerable to. And then, it's hard to think at a societal level because it would require so many forces sort of to go up against really capitalism, right? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
more controls on social media. We see some of that happening. And that would probably, benefit most young people, right? To have reduced access or limited access until a certain age when it comes to social media. Um, it's funny to think now. I don't know if you remember when Facebook came out, there was no advertising.
Yeah.
Like that was the original model. And I remember thinking way back then, like, how are they ever going to make money off of this? Well, I think our answer is clear now, right? Like they hooked us all in before. Then they started throwing the advertising and different messaging at us. But, so I do think we'll most likely as a society work towards regulating social media more. That seems to be the direction a lot of different parts of the world, frankly, are moving in. Um, and, I think it would be great. The UK does a much better job of this than the US does. But in terms of just regulating some of these products, whether it be skincare or diet products, it's all kind of part of the same message, right? You need to fix yourself. You need to do these things to be an acceptable human being. And so many of these products, especially in the United States, are just basically unregulated. And it's not even clear they're safe, much less that they're effective. And so, again, I can only hope, I guess, that people start to appreciate that more regulation would be useful there.
Yeah, like I guess it would have a huge difference, wouldn't it? Because it's the ocean we're swimming in, isn't it? And that just becomes so normalized. And yeah, and yeah, and it is, it feels to me in a way, it's almost like that is the kind of the root that needs to the addressing, doesn't it? But then I'm also thinking about so some of the clients that I work with, and I guess if you've been through trauma or perhaps you're neurodivergent or you're a sensitive person or, I guess numerous things that can impact self-worth, how we feel about ourselves, how we feel in relationships. I think all of those factors make one very vulnerable, don't they, to not only low self-worth, but then that kind of like gets projected onto the body, really. So I'm thinking as well, I guess it really is like you're talking at the beginning about mental health being an important topic rather than just specifically body image. But I guess I'm thinking as well as a society for us to have better body image as well. We need to have better worth, don't we? And also early ways of being able to kind of heal and get support and all of those things.
Agreed. And again, this is where my impression, my understanding is that in the UK, you're somewhat better off than we are in terms of some of the school mandated health education being a little bit more, I guess, contemporary in some cases. And, in talking about mental health in school settings, that's not something that's universally done where I live. And so, including, just enough information that a young person will at least appreciate if they need help. Right? Like not necessarily solving the problem, but at least helping them to appreciate, like, oh, wait, this might not be normal, feeling this kind of anxiety or, feeling like I should restrict what I eat in this way or whatever it may be, is actually a red flag that I should talk to somebody.
Yeah, so even just having more of that awareness so people are identifying the flags to potentially even get help later on, maybe. Um, yeah. And what about parents as well? Because I think with the best will in the world, sometimes as a parent, you can sort of think, I mean, I just thought of my own children, sometimes you think, right, I'm ready, I'm here, I'm all ready to like listen to you and give you my like body image advice. And sometimes one is not the best person to be delivering that because of it can, I don't know, you're just not the best person, are you? Maybe it's sometimes got to be a teacher or someone else. But I don't know if you have any kind of guidance for parents about initiating conversations or, some of the things that they can do with their tween or young person?
I think the first thing we need to be really mindful of as parents is, to be good role models and to be really careful what we say about our own bodies and how we develop our own relationship with food, right? Because that's constantly developing and evolving. And so we need to be really careful that we're not saying things that may seem benign, but are going to teach really problematic lessons, right? Like I ate that, so I must exercise this amount or something, right? Like we don't want to make those connections between, our self-worth and what we've eaten, or our exercise habits and what we're eating. And so we want to be careful to kind of, maybe get the support we need first so that we can be important, positive figures in our kids' lives. And that can be really hard because most of us, grew up before we were talking about these issues in anything resembling an adaptive way. I sometimes say that our generation, I assume we're roughly the same generation, um, we are like daughters of the Weight Watcher moms, right? Like how many women do I know who before they were even through puberty were like being dragged to some Weight Watchers meeting as a companion really to their moms, and moms were socialized to think like, well, I just have to teach my daughter she will need to always, be mindful and control her food intake in order to be worthy and attractive. And so, then we are trying to do better by our own kids, but that's our history. So, it's not our fault, I don't think, but we're carrying our own baggage there.
And I think it's so good to acknowledge that, isn't it? And, in a way, as parents, it's far more effective to role model than to be telling someone what to do often, isn't it? Because that will often go on deaf ears or kind of a lot of eye rolling. But as you're saying, it can be quite challenging, can't it? I mean, I know I was born the same year as Kate Moss, nothing's good as skinny feels, and
Mhm.
the whole and I guess no bad feeling towards her because she's just, part of the generation we grew up in, wasn't she? But I just think that was so normalized, wasn't it? And then, into the early 2000s with the size zero culture, and that was just seen as what you had to do, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it was everywhere, like you say. It's not like we can blame just Kate Moss. We can't
Yeah.
blame just our moms. I mean, you have to assume people, at least who care about us, were doing the best they knew how to at the time. And it was a different era, and we have more information and a better understanding now of how to help people develop a healthy relationship with food and body. And so now that we know that, we should act on it. And um, but it's not easy, And I think even as someone who does this work, my kids are gone now out of the house and adults, but as I was raising them, there were many times where I had to kind of talk myself down or say like, oh God, don't say that. Or, or even occasionally something would slip out and I'd say something and then I'd have to go back and correct. And, you know, I didn't mean to sound critical when you were eating more ice cream, but like, you know, it just came out, you should enjoy ice cream. Don't let me, make you feel guilty about that, right? I mean, all of us are human. We're all going to say things we don't mean, but I think the most important thing is just to keep trying to do our best and try to be a good role model and source of support and love, a real sense of unconditional love in a child's upbringing can be critical in terms of them then deflecting some of the other societal influences as they get older.
Yeah, no, so true. I think that's great advice, isn't it? About, in a way, that unconditional love and acceptance and home being a really safe place, isn't it? And not getting kind of drawn into being critical, maybe from, which is often not intentioned, isn't it? But I think it comes
No.
from our own anxiety, doesn't it? We're trying to like do it all right and be a good parent, but sometimes that's a big pressure. Um,
Yeah, I mean, none of us are perfect parents, and parenting is really hard, and feeding kids is really hard, right? I mean, you want to do this whole balancing act of like making sure they get nutrient dense food, making sure that they try different things, making sure they get enough, then you may on some occasions be thinking, are you eating too much? Right? I mean, there's all these things swimming in your head. And if you add in, like my kids were both preemies and had some developmental delays when they were very young, or if you have a neurodivergent child, or if you have a kid who's just a very picky eater, right? Like there's a lot of things that can actually make it even harder. And that's also a good time, though, I think, for parents to seek out some support. And it doesn't have to be, once a week counseling sessions or working with a registered dietitian, but even just sometimes two meetings with a professional who can offer some tips or tricks or advice on how to deal with your particular circumstance can go a long way.
Yeah, no, I think it's having those sort of safe spaces, isn't it? And somewhere you can just vent without shame, really, because of otherwise you're just holding it all in, aren't you?
Yes, and that's the last thing we need, right? We don't need our parents to be having their own mental health crisis because they're trying to hold it all together perfectly.
Yeah, they're so true. So what about social media and what about, I'm just thinking at the moment, there's so much in the media, isn't there, with the weight loss medication and a lot of people that are perhaps more normal healthy weight taking the drugs to get to extreme thinness. And I mean, what are your sort of thoughts about how we manage all of this with the sort of social media and the additional thin pressures?
Yeah, it's a pretty tough time to be doing this work. I'm sure that you feel it too, right? Just the last, I feel like 2 years, even things have really changed
Yeah.
with so much more dialogue about weight loss medications in particular. But I think, I talk about this a lot in the book in terms of, limiting social media, avoiding it during certain parts of the day at least, learning to be a much more critical thinker when it comes to social media, helping kids to think about like, well, what is being sold here? Like making sure they understand this isn't just like people who want to help improve their health. Like they're trying to sell a product or a lifestyle in most cases. So helping young people grow up being able to be more critical of the messaging, I think is a really essential part because we're probably not going to get rid of social media entirely ever. It's
Yeah.
it's part of our modern existence now. And there's also some good that can come of it, right? So I'm sure you've had clients, as have I, who, you know, meet people who, maybe are neurodivergent like them or are part of the LGBT community like them or find some valuable connection or sources of information through social media. And so it's not all bad, right? I mean, like I'm
Yeah.
sure how we initially connected, right? So many people I meet doing the kind of work I do
Mhm.
is through social media too, right? And that enriches my life to know more people in the field and for us to support each other and get ideas from each other. So, um, we can't say it's all evil, I don't think, but we do need to be careful how young people are socialized in terms of their use of social media.
Yeah, no, sure. I think it's a great point actually about being more critically sort of thinking about things as well. And I'm just trying to think of another example in life where we've become more critical with our thinking, because I'm sure there are areas, aren't there, where things that would have been the truth in the past, we're just much more discerning about now, really. So there's a lot of power in that, isn't there? Rather than just sort of swimming through the ocean, taking it all in.
Yeah, and I'm not positive what the policies are in the UK or what they've been historically, but one, it's probably not the best analogy, but I think it's not unreasonable is, we used to have advertising in the US all the time for cigarettes and different kinds of alcohol, and they were even targeted towards kids in some cases. And then, policies gradually began to chip away at that, and more research has emerged suggesting the dangers of different substances, especially for younger people. And, so it's not that people don't drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes, but I think there's been something of a societal shift in terms of protecting young people from those substances. And again, it's not a perfect analogy, But there's definitely been a switch, I think, in terms of how we think about those issues. And so it's not impossible for us to get to a point where we think about social media differently and really think about it in terms of protecting young people from what dangers it may pose.
Yeah, and I think that's a very powerful shift, isn't it? That potential powerful shift, really. And it does feel a bit more possible, doesn't it? Like when you think about some of those old smoking adverts and how was even, back in the day when it's almost like promoted for good health. And you kind of
Yeah,
think that would just be almost laughable now, wouldn't it?
right,
So
right.
yeah.
Like no one would like see, like smoking especially, it was like always kind of touted as like a good stress reliever. It seemed like, right? Or almost like empowering for women in particular. And and because that felt normative, I don't know, like this now we're showing our age, right? But it was acceptable. And I think
Mhm.
now, like you said, people would just like laugh if you tried to say like, oh, this is like, really empowering. They'd be like, no, it's not.
Yeah, that's so true. And what about the sort of the food side? And I'm sort of thinking, so perhaps since the pandemic, and a lot of people got really into health and perhaps orthorexia and clean eating and all the rest of it. Like, yeah, what do you sort of think about all of that and how that's sort of feeding into it all at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it was first the pandemic and people having all this time and wanting to do something, probably just to take charge of their health, which was not a bad instinct necessarily. I mean, a pandemic is sort of a traumatic experience for people. Um, and and then the weight loss drugs came out just a couple years later. And so again, I think we need to parse like what is going on here? Is this actually for health, or is this more about people feeling they need to control their bodies and people not being compassionate towards their bodies or not being actually very caring towards their bodies? Because, you know, um, a lot of people, like you said, are using weight loss medications when there's no health reason for them to even be considering them, right? In fact, if you're trying to get yourself from, I know our sizing's a little bit different, but from like a size 6 to a size 0, like you're healthier at your original size. So,
Yeah.
it's certainly complicated. And I really do have concerns about the messaging influencing young people and having young people thinking that, a good body is a controlled body. An important thing to do is to mute your interest in food or your desire to eat. And, it feels to me like we're going to have a lot more clients in the years to come because there's a parallel here in terms of what we do in treating eating disorders and trying to encourage people to trust their bodies and to nourish them and to take care of them. And in some ways, the weight loss drugs are kind of, you know, acting almost as like an eating disorder in a weird way, right? Like trying to get people to not care about food and to not necessarily nourish themselves appropriately.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I mean, I'm seeing more and more people in the therapy room that already have a diagnosis of anorexia or bulimia and are getting hold of the drugs and just not ending up in a good place at all. And I think, sometimes there's an initial honeymoon period where it just feels like, oh my God, I found the thing, as is often with so many things.
Yep.
Um, and I guess the important thing to say is, understandably for some people, the weight loss drugs are a really valuable tool. But I guess what we're talking about here is when that's not the case, when it's really taking someone away from health goals. And I'm sort of thinking earlier what you're talking about, sort of shifting perspectives and more critical thinking. Like I guess as a society, we really glamorize extremely looking kind of extreme youthfulness, extreme, we put all of this on a pedestal, don't we? Rather than like looking at some poor person that's in the public eye that has had to feel so pressured to get super thin and have the facelift and all the rest of it. Because I guess as a therapist, I sort of think, goodness me, that person is really sort of struggling a lot, really, with all that pressure and
Yeah.
having to feel good enough and to be accepted. But as a society, we glamorize it so much, don't we? And I guess it would be so great as a society if we could start to embody more these things that you were sort of talking about of, self-care and like, I don't know, sort of respecting the body and looking after ourselves and actually aspiring for genuine health rather than, you know, thinness and external validation and whatever else.
Yeah, I think it's a hard era right now to be, encouraging this though, right?
Yeah.
Anytime there's a sort of pharmaceutical intervention, like this, it's at least initially it seems very popular because who doesn't want to like take a pill or even if it has to be a shot in this case, um, to just solve a problem, right? Like that just feels so much easier. And I'm sympathetic to that. And as
Yeah.
you say, there are people with diabetes or sleep apnea or other health conditions who, of course, can be really helped by medical interventions such as these. And we don't want people to feel judged for then making that choice. So that is not at all my objective. It's much more about, not wanting just everyone now to feel like you need to jump on this bandwagon. It's not relevant to everyone. It's not a choice everyone needs to make.
Yeah, that's very true. So, Dr. Charlotte, is there anything perhaps I haven't asked you about the book specifically that you would really like to share that the audience would probably really benefit from? I'm sure there's lots of things, but is there anything really, really key?
Yeah, I know. That's like, I feel like I should say, ooh, I don't know if you want to ask me that question. I can talk about the book for a long time. But, um, one thing I'll mention, which is related to what we've just been discussing, is that in the revised version of the girls' book, I talk about intuitive eating, which is not something that I really spent time on in the original version. And I think it's really important in this era, like I've said, to have young people grow up feeling like they can trust their bodies and that they don't necessarily need external sources of control of their bodies. And so that's, part of why, but not the only reason why, there's a whole section now on, kind of what is intuitive eating, and it's broken down so that it's pretty accessible and not as detailed as I offer for adults and other contexts. But I think that's a change I felt really good about including, hoping that young people would grow up just thinking about food in this way a little bit differently, right? Like as something that is nourishing and that you can work on relying on some of your own just physiological cues and less on the world around you.
Yeah, no, sounds great. And I guess the overall theme, isn't it? It's so much about coming back to self-trust, self-respect, health, listening to the body, embodiment, all of those things. And as a society, we have become so externally validated, haven't we? I mean, I guess perhaps we've always been a bit like that as humans. We are social creatures, aren't we? But it seems like it's just hit such a crescendo at the moment with all the noise from all the different things that are going on.
Yeah, I could not have said that better. I think that's exactly right. And that is part of what really motivated me to get, a revised version of the book. The book has sold a lot and has, I hope, impacted young people. And just hated the idea of not having sort of the most up-to-date version out there for young people. And so I feel really good knowing that this is my best effort to, sort of help hopefully neutralize some of those external messages or influences so that before young people, really have these concerns or start to develop disordered eating or, start to feel depressed or anxious, that they can get just another point of view, right? That isn't this sort of external validation, but more of, like you say, how do I do what's good for myself? How do I take care of myself? How do I reject some of that societal messaging?
I think such important work, and I think fantastic as well that you're, aiming it. Well, I know you write for adults as well, but that you're aiming it at the young people because I think, you know, before the prefrontal cortex develops and we're sort of developing our ideas, we can really sow some, very valuable seeds, can't we? Which are harder to shift, later on, maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly my thinking, right? Like if we were young kids and instead of going to Weight Watchers meetings, we had someone give us a book that said like, you're okay as you are. I always wonder, like, then, how would we have grown up feeling about ourselves? I hope, it would have been easier. So.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think it would. So, Dr. Charlotte, where do we find your book? Where can people get hold of it? Yeah, can you just tell the listeners?
So the books are all published actually in the UK by Cambridge University Press. And so you can go to their webpage, of course, but I also just link to their webpage, and really everything else that I've done is just at thebodyimagebook.com. So if you just go to that webpage, you can see information about all the books. You can link to like my, university webpage, where to buy the books. It's all there. So thebodyimagebook.com.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I should put those links in the show notes. That's fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Charlotte, for coming back on the podcast. Really happy to have had you here and to, just hear all about the latest developments with the book. And I'm sure a lot of listeners are going to be very inspired and will be getting hold of the book and influencing our young people and hopefully some young people will be listening too and maybe getting hold of it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for all the work you do too in this space to try to, make the world a better place.
Thank you.